I just finished quilting my Beaded Orange Peel design, which is available on quiltingit.com in my shop, and I wanted to show you a few tips that help with lining designs up. Now I do this whether the design touches or not, but it is more important if it touches to get maybe, this one versus the vertical is what I always like to line up, whether the design touches or not. If this one didn't touch and it more so nested in here, I would want to make sure it's still lined up vertically so that it doesn't quilt maybe right on this circle and then have a bigger gap on this side, if that makes sense. So I'm going to show you quickly what I do to line these up. So I am using the Statler, the Gammill Statler, and Creative Studio 7.5, I believe, whatever the new one is. I'm also in repeat pattern mode because I love edge-to-edge mode and actually use it more, but sometimes it stretches a design in edge-to-edge mode, and so I will use repeat pattern mode, which I did today. So I'm going to show you what I did as if I were about to roll the quilt. I did just finish. So the first row would have been down more in this boundary, and this row, this bottom row, would have been out of the boundary. So when I very first quilted it, I made sure it was sewn, and then this top row was black, so it quilted out. But then when I advanced the row to do the second section, I made it black and then moved the design up so that not only would it not hit the bar, but then I would use more of the space within the boundary. So whenever I make adjustments, I'm going to highlight. When I do it in repeat patterns, I highlight everything. I want to make sure the adjustments that I'm making to the top row is happening through the rest of the section. When I do it in edge to edge, so I make the same kind of adjustment as far as the sides go. I want to make sure everything that I need to quilt and everything below that hasn't been quilted, I have everything selected so that nothing is off, and it's the adjustments are made together as I'm quilting, because quilts shrink and it's kind of out of our control. Okay, so I am going to scroll in a little bit. That's going to help me. The very first thing that I do is I do typically start on the left side because I find that most of the time that is the issue. I do also do the same thing on the right side, but the left side is usually the issue. And then in the middle, it lines up. So what I've actually done to give me these crosshairs is I have come over here, and on this is the previously quilted row. We're going to pretend like this part hasn't been quilted. I have put the needle down right here in the intersection on the top of the circle, because this circle is part of this motif, which I'll show you on the screen again in just a sec. So I've put it down right in between, and then what I'm trying to do is actually line up the design vertically on the screen, so as it quilts out here, it actually shows up vertically. And one of the great things about making this adjustment is I'm making this off of a previously quilted row where there has been some shrinkage. And as if this is just a table runner, but if this were a quilt and there were a lot more rows, it's going to continue to shrink a little bit more as we advance the quilt. And we're talking little shrinkage. It's not like an inch every time you advance the quilt. So I do have the needle down, which helps me line up that vertically, and then it allows me to also know where the crosshairs are on the machine. And here's also the motif. Okay, so you can see that the top, this needs to come up here, so I can move my whole section up just by using the up arrow. If by chance there is it's a little bit off, you can do Control Alt and, whoops, trying to push all of this with my hand at the same time. You can do Control Alt and you can see that it's making a little bit of an adjustment if your arrow is, not quite on. But that looks good. So I will do the same thing on the right side, still leaving it selected, make that adjustment, and then it really lines up in the center pretty great. So one thing as I get quilting, if I didn't trim it and was quilting out here, it's going to make the design off a little bit because it's going to start shrinking the batting. So it's good to trim along the edge. And it's good to also make sure you're quilting along every side a little bit off of the quilt, because it may look like her binding's going to cover it here, but then you can see a little bit more of it here. So you want to make sure you don't have any part that's unquilted, which I know some motifs have a lot of dead space on the right or the left, and you just have to take that into consideration and do some cropping or trimming along the edge, but make sure that the motif is full and you'd have no gaps on any side. Okay, and one thing I also want to know is I know a lot of people like to quilt left to right and then right to left and quilt out a whole section. I have found, especially when designs need to touch like this, it's best to quilt out left to right, left to right, left to right, because the shrinkage is going to be different. If you're quilting left to right and then right to left and then left to right and then right to left, it's going to throw that off. So it's never going to line up and you're going to be so frustrated. So always quilt from left to right. And I know it's more work, especially if you like to quilt a whole section, but that really has helped me. I think that's about it. Let me know if you have any questions. And it really is that simple. And like I said, I do this adjustment every time that I quilt any computerized design, whether it touches or not. We just want things to line up and nest well or touch the way it needs to. Oh, if you have an issue with it not lining up or it's off a little bit, the thing that I do, especially on the first row, you want to watch it. Every time that this would come here, if it's not quite meeting the circle, you want to barely touch the quilt. And you're just going to do it in the moment that it comes right to the circle. So it's coming up here, I touch, and then I'm off. You don't want to keep touching it or touch it too hard, but you don't want to keep touching it as it finishes quilting out the motif, because then it's going to be off for everything else in the section that should line up great. If it's quilting, let's say that these peels, orange peel petals, are quilting up into this circle, then you're going to want to touch it lightly on the back side. And you can see how light I'm touching it. And depending on which way you're having an issue, you could do it right behind. Of course, don't get your finger quilted by the quilting machine. But those are simple things to help you get this beautiful texture and look to turn out and line up and be beautiful. Let me know if you have any questions.